about 10:30, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jez. I am the Adult and Teen Programming Coordinator here at the library. I want to welcome you all to our newly relaunched Genealogy Club. So it used to meet sporadically pre-pandemic, and it was kind of just bring your research and they'll all meet together. So I wanted to revitalize it, bring in some speakers so we can all learn together, get a little bit more knowledge, and I'm hoping to also have some dedicated lab time for some of our meetings so that we can all be in the computer lab, use the library's resources, and you'll have a librarian on hand to help you with questions. So we are doing a lot of new things. So if you have any feedback for us, please let me know. Today, we are doing a hybrid program. That means that some of you are here in person and some of you are online. We are using the webinar format, which means that if you are online, you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So you can sit back and relax. I did send out some handouts. I emailed them if you are online and you have them here in person. There are also some extra pens and pencils in the back table if you need those. And I'll also send out the handouts again when I send out the recording. We are recording today. If you are here in person, if you do need to leave the room for any reason, just make sure the door closes quietly behind you. It tends to slam a little bit. And please turn off any of your cell phones or other electronics that might go off. And then I wanted to mention a couple of upcoming programs as well. On Monday night at 7, we have our monthly Ciao Italia group. So that's a good group if you want to learn a little bit of the Italian language, but also about the culture. And this meeting in particular, she's going to talk about traveling around Italy, how to ask for directions, how to barter if you need to, and some of the things you need to know to get around the country. So I think if you are also interested in traveling, that would be a good one to stop in for. And then also at Monday, if you don't want to go to Ciao Italia, you can join me for Pixar trivia. So if you enjoy the Pixar films like Toy Story and Up and all of those, we're going to have some trivia online and it's going to be a lot of fun. And there are prizes involved. Today, we're going to learn about the basics of genealogy. Sounds like a good place for all of us. We came to the right one. Our speaker today is Laura Street Chaplin. She is the owner of Willow Tree Research Genealogy Services and currently living in Sugar Grove, Illinois. Laura was raised in southeastern Iowa and has lived all around the Midwest in Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, and Ohio. She and her husband were inspired by the Roots mini-series in college, which began a lifelong love of research and genealogical learning. Raising their 3 daughters tramping through graveyards, now they have 6 grandkids in training. And in addition to her genealogy business, doing client work and offering online study groups, Laura is a former history and genealogy manager at the Lawrence J. Martin Heritage Center in Elburn. She has been active as a genealogical presenter for several years, and she is a member of the APG GSG, board member for the Kane County Genealogical Society, a director on the governing board for the Illinois State Genealogical Society, and a member of local societies. So thank you for making time for us. You sound incredibly busy.
Yeah, and the one thing that I don't put in the bio is ever since COVID hit, I am homeschooling 3 grandchildren full time. So add that in, and yeah. But I like to be busy and always have. Sounds like you guys at Elmhurst are off to an exciting development with bringing back your genealogy club. That is so great. So definitely you're on the right track. Okay. So I kind of already did. If I was with you in person, we could just say, okay, everybody stand up who's been researching for 5 years or more. And, I usually do that and have you sit down as we go to see who's been researching the longest and who's been just starting. And anything in between is great. It's fine. So, since we kind of did that in the chat, and it sounds like most of us this morning are just getting going or maybe have made a couple of stabs at it and now we're ready to refuel, recharge. So, I think this will be good. So, let me share my screen and get my slides up. As just said, I did send some handouts. And so one of them looks like this. This is just a basic questionnaire, and I'm going to refer to this one. If you have it in front of you, great. If not, you can always go back and look at it, or just grab some scratch paper and answer questions as we go. But I try to do this one as a little bit like a workshop, so I'll refer to these questions periodically. And the other one you have is this full article on rookie mistakes. So I'm going to touch on the different ideas, but I did give you the full thing so you could read it in depth on your own. And then also this short article on start with what you know. It was kind of amusing. I thought the way she wrote it was very interesting. So I always include that, and I'll just summarize it a little bit once we get going. Okay, so welcome, as we said, and you've already heard my name, and the name of my research company is Willow Tree Research Genealogy Services. So here we go. And I just got a new logo, so I've got to include that in different things. So today we're talking about genealogy bare bones basics and kind of subtopic of the start with what you know, because a lot of times we have more than we think that we could just pick up from our stuff at home. Okay, so just going to jump in with a very quick, what I think is amusing visual summary. So I hope that you find it entertaining as well. It seems like ads and lots of other items concerning genealogy are just always popping up. We see those shaky leaves from Ancestry, and we see all the DNA companies advertising. It was not always that way. When I started in the 1979, maybe early 80s, there were no computers, and you didn't have internet, and the only researching you could do is to go to libraries or go to courthouses, cemeteries, things like that. So now we have so much available, but still everything is not online. Everything is not on Ancestry. So we have to be careful in knowing which way those signs are pointing us and which way should we go. So today's session hopefully will help us to get the ball rolling. So if you think back, what ignited your own rocket flame of interest in genealogy and family history? The typical advice is to start with what we already know about ourselves and our families. So if you haven't already done so, you want to write down everything you already know and then start talking to your older relatives for background information. Does everything that they tell you match? Do all those lovely stories that you're hearing line up? Or are there perhaps discrepancies? If not, take note of them. But hopefully the things that you discover as you go will point you in the right direction. And then once the additional information starts to fall into place, it's a little bit like pouring water on your garden. And over time, you're going to see a beautiful family tree begin to grow. Okay, so what do we really know? Well, if you look at this picture that's going to come down here in a sec, if you look just at the top part, it all looks the same. But look down below. Each one is not what you expect if you look a little bit deeper. Some of those guys have long legs and some have very, very short. So, as family historians, we have to have a little bit of a healthy skepticism of everything that we're told or everything we see in a book or on a document, and verify everything with as much documentation as we can. So trust but verify. I think that was Ronald Reagan's quote. It fits for our genealogy, because really in the end, we don't know very much with absolute certainty. So we use that healthy skepticism and we try to find proof. So by trusting and verifying, we search for documents that are going to substantiate what we have found, and we make sure we record a citation. I can't stress that one enough. Me, like most genealogists, made the mistake at the beginning of research of not recording where I was finding things. So learn from my mistakes, and this is a really good piece of advice. Make sure you keep track of what you've looked at, even if you haven't found anything, and where you found pieces that you did find. Okay, so we're just going to kind of talk about some of the, I guess you could say, best practices to recording all of your information. So this is start taking from that rookie mistakes um, article. So we're going to go through it one piece at a time. So when you're just starting out, we tend to focus on just our person. But really, we should be focusing on the whole family and maybe the location where they are, because you're going to find out very soon they're all linked. Sometimes we start out taking poor notes, but the better practice is to document everything very well. We also, in our excitement, we jump to unsupported conclusions. That's just because we're human. But we really want to pursue solid evidence from multiple sources. We might assume there's one correct spelling for each of our names. I can't tell you how many times I've had people say, oh, that can't be, my Brookings because it's spelled without the S. Well, Brookings, and lots of variations, Brocking, all kinds of things you can think of could still be your people. People didn't standardize spelling until pretty close to 1900. So it was spelled the way they felt like spelling it. So a better, more experienced way is to use alternative spellings and really be creative in how we think about how could anybody possibly in their wildest dreams spell this name. Okay, when we're just starting out, when we're rookies, we may kind of have vague research goals. We're just thinking, oh, I just want to find out more about a person or more about a family. And really, we want to work on one specific event at a time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about developing research questions a little bit later. Okay, numbers 6 through 10. We tend to jump between families too often when we're just getting going. And that, again, is excitement or kind of getting distracted, jumping like Alice down the rabbit hole. It's better if we get our question in mind and then research all the family members in a generation at least, if not all the way back that you can in one family, and then move on. And it sounded like some of you are doing that. I saw somebody said they'd spent several years on Scottish research and several years on Irish. Yay! That sounds like a really good idea. Okay, we might start with an ancestor in the distant past. That's not a good idea because when you are just getting going, you don't want to jump generations. What if there was something wrong in one of the generations building up to that generation? So you want to actually start with yourself and then work backwards chronologically. And you don't have to do everybody in one whole generation, like all four grandparents before you move on, but at least in one line, work backwards. Okay. We might assume that there's no record, that there just isn't one in existence, even though we didn't really try very hard. So, more experienced is stay focused on the original goal and just keep trying because probably there's something out there we can use to try to answer our question, even if it's not direct. We might overlook hidden friends and relatives. That's kind of right back to number one. You don't want to just focus on one person because you might have people around the person that you want to focus on. And so you should assume that if they're close by or they show up several times as witnesses at a baptism or a wedding, or maybe they're named in a will or something like that, even if they're not a family member, there's some kind of relationship there. So you don't want to ignore those people. We might avoid discussing contradictory evidence because we're like, oh, this doesn't match. Well, then that can't be right. So we don't want to be that way. We want to really notice those contradictions and analyze them. Try to figure out, well, where did this information come from versus this other information that doesn't match? Where did that come from? Who had it originally? And, which one is more likely to be right? Sometimes we can't prove it beyond the shadow of a doubt, but we're not in a court of law. What we're trying to do is just make reasonable assumptions and write down our thought process. Okay, so 11 to 14. we might not think about sharing our work. In fact, sometimes when we're just getting started out, we're a little bit possessive about, well, I'm the one that found that. But the chances are we're not the only one that found that. And if we can reach out to other people that might be working on the same family, or we find a cousin because we did DNA testing, they might know something we didn't. And if you have other people looking at your work, they might point out something that you didn't notice. So sometimes many hands do make light work. And genealogy, I don't think, is a solo sport. I think it's best if it's a team sport. So, yay for your genealogy group. Share with each other, and you'll develop friendships as you go too. Okay, sometimes when we're getting going, we don't sharpen the saw often enough. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, basically, we might not educate ourselves enough. And genealogy, like lots of disciplines, is changing. It's changing pretty fast. So if you pursue some kind of ongoing education, the more you can get, the more excited you get, the more places you think of to look. So that kind of helps. And then we might expect too much. So be patient. It isn't instant. It's not all on Ancestry. It's not all online. So expect the slow progress and hard work. But oh boy, you really get a benefit once you find those big things. It's great. It's so exciting. And don't give up too early. Sometimes you can get discouraged when you're first starting out, because if you research in an unhurried, cautious, and deliberate way, it will lead to enduring information and an enduring legacy that you can pass on. So that's kind of the quick overview of the rookie mistakes and what maybe to do as a more experienced researcher. So just some encouragement. Okay, so the rest of our time now, we're going to talk about 10 basic tips. And some of these come right out of those advice out of the rookie article. Okay, so these are 10 basic tips that are going to help your family history journey. So we're just going to get ourselves started. Okay, so number 1, record what you know. That's the same thing as start with what you know, but just make sure you write it down. So you're going to want to think about your oldest living relatives. Who is there that's still living that you could interview? My mother was one of 13 children, and she's gone, and her oldest brother is gone. But I still have 11 aunts and uncles who are all getting up there in years. And I keep telling myself I've got to go and interview them. Now, I have when I first got started 40 plus years ago, but I have different questions now. So I'm thinking I really need to get over there and talk to a bunch of them in Iowa. But if you already did it originally, like me, and some of those people are gone, you still might find some other people in the family to talk to and see what they remember, or maybe what that older family member told them. So even though it's secondhand, it could be family legends. There's usually a grain of truth. So interviewing is the first thing you do, and it's a very foundational thing. So people could have learned something in the meantime if you're interviewing them a second time, or maybe they remembered something that they didn't remember before. Okay. You also periodically want to go back and reread the interview notes that you did take, or maybe you did a video or an audio recording of your relative. Watch it or listen to it again. You might hear something that you missed the first time around. I recently was going through some of my basic foundational stuff and came across a letter that my mom had written me when I was in college and just getting interested. And in reading it in detail, I picked up several things that I hadn't even noticed the first time around, because she was talking about a family that I didn't even know how they fit in. So this time I went, oh my gosh, I've had this all along. So you just never know. Basically, you need to know something, some kind of background information just to get going. So you could go to a library, you could log into an online genealogy database. But first start gathering all the information you either know, suspect, or could find out. And start right at the beginning, keeping that good record of each piece. Okay. you might want to, in your interviews, now you can get online and look up interview questions for genealogy, and you'll find several different articles or forms that you could do. But you do want to think about things like nicknames, what was their occupation, where they lived, as well as information on births and marriages and deaths, as well as the places. Don't forget the places that go with those, family stories. Anything that's very interesting to you is going to be interesting to your own descendants, so you can write it up or pass it down. Um, there's a lot of normal genealogy forms, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but there's two basic ones: a family group sheet, or sometimes people just call it a FGS, and a pedigree chart. So the one is the record of one whole family, basically on a page, for each marriage, of the husband and wife that are the mainstays of that family. And then the pedigree chart is what you normally would see, just, a name and then their parents and so on, all on one chart. Okay. You might have royalty hiding in the wings. Some people think surely they will. You might not, but sometimes you find you do. So, but don't forget, even if you do have a royal line somewhere, which is great because then you connect to all kinds of different royalty, because they all intermarried for generations. But if you have royalty, so do thousands, probably millions of other people. So it's not like you're the only one. Okay, so if you're going to follow along with the questionnaire, the first handout that I showed you, you might take a minute right now and jot down who comes to mind that you could interview. Just think about that for a second. Okay, so step number 2. You're going to check at home in all the nooks and crannies for hidden treasures that might be there. So this is the perfect way to help your research take off. You want to do some serious searching at home, every storage area that you can think of, like attics and closets and basements and garages and all that kind of stuff, safe deposit boxes. You especially want to find those vital statistics: births and deaths, certificates, obituaries, maybe newspaper clippings that somebody's kept, family Bibles, letters, diaries, maybe the backs of photographs have information, yearbooks, diplomas, scrapbooks. I had a grandmother that kept scrapbooks like crazy, and I've got them all. Postcards that people sent from a trip, maybe, and sometimes made those into a scrapbook. Tax records, other family papers. I mean, there's a huge list of things you could look for, and every single one of them might give you some important clues. Again, write down family traditions and how did you learn about it? Who told that to you? Family reunions are a great place. When I go to a family reunion, I park myself in one spot with my computer and I start waving over relatives to sit down and talk to me. So I have lots of records of that kind of interview, and it turns out to be wonderful information because I'm getting it straight from them about their children and maybe their grandchildren and where they moved to last year and all of that kind of good stuff. Okay, so when you have items that get passed down, like objects, not paper, but objects. Like I have a really old rocking chair that my grandfather either made or re-put together for his mother. So my great grandmother, but it might have come from her mother. My husband had it redone when I was a young mom for me, and I recaned it on the bottom, and I used it nursing and rocking all my children. So that is really important in my family. Well, that's not something that I can pack up in a box. So I have taken pictures of it and written the story of it, and then that's a digital photo that I have that I save on my computer telling the history of it. Okay, so question number 2 for step 2. Which of these kinds of things that I just listed do you have or you could gain access to? So think about that, because I'm hoping that after today you're going to have a list of things to kind of get you jump started, get the ball rolling. Okay, moving on to step 3. Learn and use family history basics. So you need to organize. You're going to figure out very quickly that as you start to gather information, there has to be a way to organize it, or else everything just kind of descends into chaos. Now, I do one whole topic, one whole day, a presentation day on just organizing. So I can't go into detail, but this is where you're going to rely on those 2 standard genealogy forms and charts, the family group sheet and the pedigree chart. Those will help you keep track of all the data that you're collecting. And it will also, if you have stuff printed on a form and then you come in to talk to Jez or go to a different library, if you can show the librarian a chart, it is way easier, I speak from experience, to try and do our best to help you, because they know right at a glance where is the information missing and where could we find something maybe at our library. Record all those vital statistics of birth, marriage, and death. Make sure you put full names of the people, because sometimes the middle names are very important. At some certain times in their lives, people might have gone by that middle name, and you won't find them if you don't know what it is. Also, like I said, include place names and anything else that seems pertinent. So you want to become familiar with those standard charts. And if you do decide that you want to use a computer, a software program to record everything, those will print those forms right out for you, blank ones or filled in with all of your information. So that is very, very helpful. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about formulating a good research question, because you need to have a targeted way to get the information that you want. So here's just some characteristics of a good research question. It should concern a documented person, not just somebody you've heard about in the family, but somebody for whom you've already got some evidence that they existed in a certain place at a certain time. You don't want your question to be either too broad or too narrow. So you don't want everything about a person, and you don't want you want the full birth date of a person. That might be too narrow. Maybe there is nothing at that time frame that would tell you exactly the birth date. So you might never be able to fulfill that question. And the third quality is that it would seek specific information about that person's 3 different categories about that person: a relationship between them and someone else, an identity question: are they the same person in this county as the one who later lived over in this county? That would be about their identity. Or maybe an activity for them. Is this the person who had a child at such and such a date in such and such a place? Okay, so you want to think about these. So here's an example of each one. A relationship question: who were the parents of A.B. Buss, who lived in Jackson County, Michigan in 1840? So notice I have a name and a place and a time. So in your questions that you formulate, you want to include all 3 as much as possible. It could say in the 1840s, because maybe you don't know exactly. Okay, an identity question: which Benjamin Jones, paying taxes in King George County, Virginia in the 1820s and 1830s, which one of those was Watt Jones's son? So there's 2 or maybe more people named Benjamin Jones, and you're trying to figure out which is the one you want. So this, again, it gives a name, a place, and a time, and then even a little bit about the identity of how are you going to tell. And then an example of an activity question: what service, if any, did Josiah Burton, whose children were born in Norwich, Vermont in the 1760s, provide during the Revolutionary War? So you're trying to figure out if the Josiah Burton you're researching was a Revolutionary War veteran. But again, you have a name, a place, and an approximate date, a time period at least. Okay. Oh, I forgot to ask the question. So for question 3, just take a moment and think, what would be your top research question? Knowing your families and what you're working on, just jot down a beginning research question. And maybe you could share one with me when we get to the questions at the end. Okay, so step number 4, record your family tree. So you want to enter what you know so far, either online or using a genealogy software or just on your paper forms. Any of those is fine. You want to record all the documents that you found because that's your citations, and anything you wrote as far as what your thought process is. What can you tell from this document? Build a solid foundation. If you do that now, it will support your future findings. It keeps your tree, the trunk of your tree, sturdy. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about advantages of using a genealogy software program. For one thing, you only have to type the information once. When you do paper forms, you either have to get someplace where you have a copier, or you have to rewrite or retype information every time you want to use it. I got very tired of that in the days before computers. Every time you type something or write it over, you increase an opportunity for a mistake to be made, because we're just human and sometimes we reverse numbers or misspell something or whatever when we're copying. So just putting it in once is a big advantage. It also, if it's in a computer somewhere, you have control over it. I don't like having everything on Ancestry or MyHeritage or any of those sites as my main tree. I keep my master file of everything that I've documented on my computer because then I have control over it. I don't think Ancestry or MyHeritage or any of the other big sites are going to go out of business anytime soon, but they could. It's possible. Corporations sell and then the new owner decides not to do it the same way. So I want to be able to control what I have, and then I back it up periodically. So, and it makes it easy for me to share my results with other family members, because from my computer software, I can just click a few buttons and it prints out a report in whatever way I want it to look. And it puts everything, including your information, all the documents you've found, and all the media. Maybe you found photographs of your family, or you've taken pictures of specific documents. It keeps it all in one place because you can attach all that to specific people. So that's kind of those are the main reasons I think using a genealogy software is good. And it's fine, you can download that off of your computer and then upload that to Ancestry and not feel like you have to maintain every change that you make in your master. Doesn't have to be reflected on Ancestry or any other site. And once you do this, eventually a thing of beauty is going to emerge from all your hard work. Okay, so question for number 4. Do you use genealogy software so far? And if so, which one? And if not, do you have a plan that you want to try with one? I use Roots Magic. I've used it for years. I used it before it was Roots Magic, and I like it the best. It's also one of the most less expensive, and it has a lot of tutorials and videos and all of that kind of thing. Now, I have for several years, I did use Family Tree Maker. Just personal opinion, I like Roots Magic better. You may love Family Tree Maker. That's perfectly fine. I've had lots of dedicated genealogists I've known that use Legacy or use Reunion if you have an Apple. So there's several big ones out there. They're all good. They're mostly interchangeable. Mostly they do the same things. Okay, so step number 5. A good way to just get going is to just pick one family story you've heard about and investigate it. So if you hear something intriguing, just start exploring. Think about newspaper archives and other records that maybe could shed some light. Maybe you heard a story that somebody was shot. That's probably in the newspaper, unless it was in the 1700s, and even then it might have been, depending on the place. If somebody was a scoundrel, that story will probably pass down in the family. And most of the time, those kinds of things you can find in newspapers. Stories could be a legend, maybe something about an ethnic background that was talked about. Maybe something about somebody was a professor at a college, so something to do with education. Maybe military service. You might hear stories about military service. Or maybe a connection to somebody prominent in American history. In my family, the one that was like that was I was told all the time from childhood that our family was connected to Daniel Boone. And well, I was kind of interested. It didn't really matter much to me, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to the details. And then later on, when I started doing family history, I wanted to know. And so, in doing the research to try to prove whether or not we did actually have a connection, I found that we are descended from Daniel Boone's oldest sister. So, I'm not descended directly from him, but I am descended from his parents through his sister. So, sometimes those stories have truth in them. So, your question for step number 5, is there a family story in your family that you've heard? One that you might like to research? Maybe write that down real briefly and think about, well, where could you start to dig into that story and see if it's true? Okay, step number 6, stay informed with social media, with education, like what you're doing today. This counts. So you're on step 6. There are countless social networking possibilities: Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, online sharing groups. There's professional groups, there's forums on Ancestry and other sites like that. There's just all kinds of ways that we can stay connected to the genealogy community, and it is a community, or educate ourselves. You could read articles. There is a plethora of YouTube videos. I use those. I have, through my business, I do weekly study groups on various topics. We'll study one topic for like 2 months in a row, 2 hours a week. And for those, I research in depth on YouTube videos and share quick wins with the group live, and others I put in a list of resources for them so that they can look it up. So I have one starting in April, for instance, on DNA. And so I have just all kinds of videos. YouTube is a wonderful, wonderful place. You could check out online educational courses. There's a lot of them that are free or nearly free, just not very much. National Genealogical Society just revamped their whole educational offerings. So if you go to, I think it's NGS Genealogy, but if you just Google National Genealogical Society, you'll get to it. And they have several educational courses for not very much. If you do this continuing education, it builds your knowledge base. And the more you know what to ask. That's what I've always found. And come back to your Elmhurst Library. Be part of this new genealogy club. You will gain immensely, I promise. Okay, so your question for number 6, other than today, what was the last thing that you did to stay informed about genealogy or learn something new? Okay, we are moving right along. So number 7 is pick the low-hanging fruit. So what would I mean by that? You're going to start with the easiest things to find, and then you move on from there. So start with a family surname search. For me, one of my grandmothers was named Quaintance. That's a very unusual name. So while it's a little hard to find, it's also an easy one to search by because it's not going to give me 10,000 results. So if I searched Quaintance family on Ancestry or on Family Search or on MyHeritage or any place like that in the records portion, I'm going to get some hits and then things that I can look up. So try that. Your surname plus the word family or family history, something like that. And in the handout, I've given you several links. One is to the Family Search Catalog Surname Search. You can get to it just by going to Family Search, but this is just a quick shortcut, basically, to get right straight to the surname search. On the World Catalog, we say it WorldCat for short. I gave you a a link straight to their advanced search and told you in here in the subject field, enter the surname and add the word family. So for my example, Chaplin family. And then to what we call the periodical source index, that's called PERSI for short. The people search using the surname field. So I gave you a link there. So that's under section A there. Next, you might try searching for a location, maybe a county, a town, or village histories on the same kind of sites. And I gave you a family search, place search link, or a WorldCat link. Under subject, you would put your place plus history. And then a third, I guess I should say, a third place to start is going to be census. If you've done any genealogy at all, you've probably already looked at least some at census. So that's a very solid starting place, especially in the more recent years from 1850 on. They're going to list every person in a family household along with their age and where they live. And in some of those, it's going to say how that person is related to the head of the household. So you right away establish relationships like daughter or son-in-law or mother-in-law or things like that. Very valuable. And all those censuses are indexed. And most of the time, you want to, well, not most of the time, all the time, you want to try and find each person in your family in every census in which they should have appeared. Now, some might be hard to locate, so don't get hung up on it, but make an attempt to find your people in every census that they could be in. Now, you may have already heard, I hope, that 1950 census is just about to be released. They're released after 72 years. So 1950 plus 72 is 2022. So April 1st, which is just around the corner now, it will be completely in its entirety released. And it has also this time a built-in name index. It's just optical character machine language index. So they know there will be some mistakes, but people, real people, are going to go through it and index to verify that information. But at least it has an index for us to get started. So since that 1950 is almost out, not being able to see you in person, I can't see, what age ranges we're talking about. But for me, I was born in 1957, so I'm still not going to be in the 1950, but my parents will be, and it's before they were married. So that's great. That's the first time I will have been able to find my parents in, well, no, I guess I could find them in the 40, both of them, and one of them in the 1930. But this will be the first time that they're young adults. So this will be quite interesting. So think about, who do you have that might be in 1950, at least as a child? And, what parents or grandparents of that person. So look for your people in the census, record all the information you find, even if you don't think it's going to be valuable for you, record it anyway. And so your question for step 7 is exactly what we were just talking about. Who might you find in the 1950 census? And maybe what about the 1940? Okay, step number 8 is research one family story at a time. Remember those rookie mistakes? We tend to try to go too big, too fast. So you want to pin it down to one story, because that's a lot less daunting if you can focus on just one story or one or two families, rather than everything at once and bounce around from thing to thing. Then you become jack of all trades but master of none. Have you heard that phrase before? So it's less confusing and you can help yourself keep everything straight. Now, the only exception I would say to this one family or story at a time is if, like in my mom's side where I said she was one of 13 kids, well, that large family lived in a town of about 400 residents. So, needless to say, I have relatives throughout the town. And because, if they've been there for several generations, a lot of different families have intermarried. So in that case, I might just do research for Oakville, Iowa, and not only focus on one family. So sometimes you can focus on a whole locality. One other idea in doing that is if after you've gone for a little ways, and let's say you've got an ancestor that was an immigrant. Well, my soonest one that was an immigrant is a great grandfather. Well, maybe I want to focus just on him or on his family. And in fact, I guess that's kind of what I did when I was a young mom, still having kids and interested in genealogy. I did a book on the Gerst side of my family, and it was on that immigrant ancestor, discovered who his parents were, and interviewed countless relatives. It was a very prolific family, and put that together in a book in 1982. So that's been a long time. Now I need to update it. Okay, so question for number 8, step 8, is which branch of the family comes to mind for you? Where would you start your research? So kind of get yourself a target. Okay, step number 9. You want to keep in touch with relatives. You want to find out what they know that might have gotten lost in your side of the family. In my mom's family, that big family, her dad was kind of the black sheep of the family, and the rest of them were all involved in a very nonconformist, I guess you would say, church, a little bit similar to Amish and Mennonite, called Apostolic Christian. And I still have many, many, many cousins who are involved in this church in Oakville, Iowa. And so my side of the family kind of broke away because my grandfather didn't continue to go to that church, for which I'm kind of grateful. But it meant we didn't have a lot of the stories. And so once I started doing the research on that book, I started talking to cousins who either had stayed into the church longer or were still in the church and could tell me all kinds of stories about that great grandfather immigrant. I did not know that he was extremely musical. Well, I'm extremely musical. I've been the director of music at several different Catholic parishes as we moved around the Midwest, and I never knew that grandfather was really musical. I knew my mom was, and so I guess it kind of passed down in that side of the family, but I didn't know that. He led the music at that little bitty church for something like 40 or 50 years. So I would never have known that if I hadn't started asking questions and talking to the relatives on that side of the family. So you might find that it's worthwhile to jog memories of more distant relatives and ask those specific questions. And sometimes you asking the question gives them some energy. I had talked to a great aunt, and because I was asking and interested, she was all excited. She went to all kinds of trouble and copied a bunch of stuff out of the Bible and sent me information. I mean, it was a treasure trove. So it's always a good idea. So your question for step number 9 is, how could you obtain addresses for some of these distant relatives? Maybe there's one person in your family that might keep addresses or is good at sending out Christmas cards. I'm a failure. I can't do it. But is there somebody that you can think of that maybe you could start to find some addresses for more distant relatives? So that's your number 9. Okay, and the final in the 10 tips, find some kind of a society that focuses on family history or genealogy. There's almost always some kind of a local society wherever you live in the United States. Often there's more than one that's available to you. And if you join one in your home area, even if you don't have any ancestors in that area, for instance, I'm on the board for Kane County Genealogy Society. I'm the vice president doing programming and marketing this year. Well, I don't have anybody in Kane County, but knowing these people in the society, it helps me develop genealogy friendships, and it helps me learn about Kane County because sometimes I get clients who are from Kane County since that's where I live. So it has benefits, but it also, genealogy is genealogy. It doesn't really matter what place you're in. So lots of people in the local societies don't really have local ancestors. So I always thought you kind of needed to. Nope, you don't. So you will get more educational opportunities because most of these local societies either offer meetings with speakers, or time together to work on projects, that kind of thing. Some of the societies offer research services if you do have ancestors in that locality. Sometimes they have newsletters where you could post a query for free if you're a member. It just can be really invaluable. What if you're planning to do a research trip? Like maybe you have ancestors out in Ohio. Well, you might want to join the society in the county where your ancestors lived out there and be a member long distance. That's usually not a problem at all. And those people can be a huge source and help for you when you plan that research trip, hoping COVID stays away and we can all get back to going on these trips. But so there's lots of uses for this. And by the same token, lately, our libraries, as you've seen, are becoming also not just sources for materials in local history that they might hold, but also a place for education and genealogy friendship. And Jez was talking about doing a computer lab. Those are such fun. At Elburn, we did a genealogy lock-in, and it would be after hours for the library. It was so fun because there was nobody in the library except us and the genealogy librarian. And we could do whatever we wanted, use any of the resources, and sit together in a room and gab about our stuff. So that was a lot of fun. And you can even do them Zoom. We're still doing them up there. Okay, so question for number 10. Are you already a member of a local society or a dedicated patron of a library? Do you belong to any of them? And maybe would you like to? Okay, so I hope that everybody's been able to jot down some answers for yourself as we've gone through. So just to go back through the tips, start your family tree, search for hidden treasures that you already have. You'll find more than you think. Learn the family history basics. I'm tilting my head to read it sideways. I just realized I saw myself. Start your online family tree. Investigate one family story. Try to stay informed and educated. Search the U.S. Census diligently. Focus on just one family at a time. Keep in touch with more distant relatives and find a society, I should add, or library. Okay, so just two other things I'd like to show you before we get to some questions. I've got lots of questions I'd love to talk with you. Okay, so beyond just those 10 beginner tips, on Find My Past, they have a really good educational section. Now, so does Ancestry, so does Family Search. In fact, I don't have it in here, but the Family Search Wiki is a wonderful place to start. I did this 5 years ago and they weren't quite so big, but I should add it. So, but I did give you in your main handout on the last page, I gave you a link to two different articles that are on Find My Past. 10 steps to move beyond the census, because we typically start with census, and then 20 family history resources. So I did give you links to those. But in the 10 tips to move beyond the census, it's basically, even if you don't have firm dates, estimate dates to at least get you in the ballpark. Trace a family's immigration, look for employment records, check the neighbors to find more relatives, and maybe people buried right beside your people in the cemetery. Even if the surnames are different, it could be that they're actually family. Learn about people who were in the military, look for children that haven't been listed anywhere, look at naturalization dates, hunt for land ownership, try city directories, and then go to state censuses instead of the federal censuses. Those were usually done it usually was every 10 years, but instead of being 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950, etc., it'd be 1905, 1915, 1925. So it'd come in between. Okay, so those are just two things for you to, look at on your own. So we are to the point of questions. But thank you again for having me. I love talking to new people. So I'm going to, Jez, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and stop sharing so that I can see at least your face if you come in front of the camera. And does anybody have questions?
Hold on, she can't hear you.
Yep. I
My,
can hear Jez, but I can't hear people back there.
I was wondering where would I look for the 1950 census? Is that online?
It will be. It's released April 1st. And if you go to the National Archives, the NARA webpage, it's nara.gov. Um, they have a whole page and subpages dedicated to it already. And you can begin looking and getting prepared now in these next 2 weeks. But then it will be released there. And it's also going to be released about the same time, if not the same time, on Family Search and Ancestry and some of the big sites.
and I want to mention our next meeting, which is April 21st, will actually be all about censuses and city directories to time
Perfect.
that release.
Perfect.
We do have a question online. It says in step 6, you mentioned FHIG and TCPL. What do
Oh,
those?
okay. I probably should have taken that little part out. I must have missed that. FHIG is Family History Interest Group, and it was at the Town and Country Public Library. So that's outdated. Now, they do still have presentations and stuff. I don't work there anymore. I retired a few years ago. But yeah, that was a specific to my old library. Sorry about that.
Although you discourage hard copy family trees, is there a hard copy format that you recommend?
You can find hard copy forms online. If you just search genealogy forms free, there is a bunch. And if you do use a computer software, you can print out blank ones for you to work with. And I don't mean to discourage it entirely. I mean, sometimes it's just you want to write stuff out. I just think it's good to at least have it recorded digitally too.
Do we have any other questions in person? Raise your hand. I can bring the microphone over. Okay.
I
We do have
see.
one more
Yeah.
online. Diane says, I can't find my mother's father until his draft registration for World War I. He lists his birth date and place of birth. He ends up enlisting in the Navy. I can't find him in a census until 1930. How can I locate him?
Do you know his parents?
That is another topic we're going to be covering. Actually, our May meeting is about tracing your veteran ancestors.
Oh, you are just right on top of it. Look at that. I would say not knowing his age, but if he was in World War One, then I would think he would be, an adult in 1930, possibly. I mean, no, he would be an adult in 1930 if he was old enough to sign up for the draft in World War One. So yeah, I would try name variations, and I would look for his parents. And if his parents had died, was he living with an aunt and uncle or a neighbor or something like that? So yeah, without knowing the particulars, I don't know, but give it a shot and good luck.
I would also
Oh, okay.
suggest looking for dates around that because a lot of them lied about their age to register.
Yep. Especially if they were on the young side.
Just wondering how to research immigration, like Ellis Island information.
Ellis Island has a wonderful website. You have to sign up to make an account, but it's free. And then they have some really good tutorials on how to search, but it's pretty much like searching on Ancestry or one of the other search sites. So just go to, I think it's ellisisland.org, I think. It's something, it might be .com, but it's very easy. Now, it's not easy to always find your right person, but they have a lot of things indexed now. There's also you could go to a site called Steve Morse, like Morse code, Morse, stevemorse.org. He has like super search forms that, and he specializes in immigration and in a few other things. So if you go to his site, and I think it's the one called the Gold Search or something like that. I think it's the Gold Search. It searches a lot of immigration sites at once for you, and you have a lot of control on putting in your information and whether it's exact or sounds like this. I've had a lot of luck finding immigrants through his site.
David says, my grandfather did a trip to Scotland in 1957, during which he visited
Ooh.
churches and cemeteries. At present, I don't have his notes of which churches. Shall I simply record trip to church by Benton in 1957?
Yes, I'd maybe add the word unknown. Trip to unknown church on site in Scotland by Glenn Benton. Yes, but that's so cool. I hope eventually you do get his notes. But how wonderful! I love having family who were genealogists long, long before it was a craze. My parents, not my parents, my dad, not my mom, were all, my dad's side is Quaker. And so he and his parents were genealogists, which is wonderful on the one hand, and even more so because they were Quaker. And so there's lots of good Quaker records. But the downside is I inherited truckloads of stuff that are still sitting, a lot of it in my basement. So it's good and bad. I see a question from Vicky. Do you have a suggestion for printed family tree that includes extended family to spread out on a table? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know of a form that really does what you're talking about, although I kind of wish there was. It's just, it'll take up so much space so quickly. But I would look on, if you use a computer software, I would look to see what kinds of charts and forms can be printed from there. There are some that will do more of it. Other than that, try just printing the family group sheets out, because the family group sheets will list parents and then all the children, and it'll also list who the children married. So you won't have their children all on one form, but if you then print a family group sheet for each child's marriage, you'd have it with several pages. So at least you can flip back and forth and look and kind of keep track. So that might be your best bet if there's not a form on your computer.
On in my family, the family actually has two branches only because they have different spellings, and so I guess what I'm asking is, and I also got a birth certificate from one of my aunts that is just the name in that family was just really garbled and very strange. What do we do with those things? If I wanted to research my aunt, would I have to use that crazy spelling that they did, that they used from her, on her birth certificate?
You're going to want, well, the person listening to the name may have just written it down the way they heard it. So it might not be how the family actually spelled it. And like I said, I don't know what dates you're talking about, but up until about 1900, they didn't really make an effort to standardize spellings on things. So I would try all of the alternate spellings that you know of. So as you search for each one. Try the one you think is the most likely. If you don't find them there, try another alternate. And if you don't find them there, try another alternate. So, but yes, keep track of that weird garbled one on your aunt's document, because maybe that branch of the family really did spell it that way, at least for a while. Now, not knowing your particulars, if it was an immigrant family, sometimes the immigrant families changed their names to be more Americanized. It's kind of an old wives' tale that Ellis Island officials did it. They did not, but they employed people in every language practically known to man who would be native speakers to do exactly that, translate the names coming in. So it's very, very, very rare for it to have happened at Ellis Island. Where they changed it was when the families got here and they wanted to sound more American, or maybe right before World War I or World War II, a lot of German immigrant people didn't want to sound German anymore because of the war. They didn't want to sound like the enemy, so they changed the spellings of their name. And I think sometimes they changed them a couple times until they figured out a way. So you might find them spelled one way in a certain span of years and then spelled a different way later on when they settled on what they wanted. So I know it's annoying and it can get confusing, but yeah, the simple answer is yeah, you're going to have to try those different spellings.
All right, any other questions? Okay, so I don't see any others. So hope to see you all back in April when we talk about the censuses and city directories. And Laura, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
Information to go off of.
Okay, I hope that gets you going for your genealogy club, and best of luck with that. I hope I can come back sometime in the future. That would be great. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everybody.